Hello, I'm William Michael, the headmaster of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. And in a comment on a recent talk on the Academy YouTube channel, a friend asked if I would share what exactly led me, both me and my wife, to become lay Dominicans, and if I'd discuss that process a little bit. And I think it's very important for me to do that. I think that interest in lay religious orders is something that really needs to be spoken about more among Catholics. And I'd like to share my own story and explain what it was that led us to even consider joining a lay community in the Catholic Church, what that means, how we made that decision, how we got started, and so on. And I hope you find this helpful because, as I said, I think that for many Catholics, there's a sense that they're called to more than just being parishioners at their local Catholic church. They feel like they're called to more. They want a deeper spirituality. They want greater formation. They want more community. They want to be with like-minded Catholic people, and they just don't feel like they have any sense of whether that's available or where they can seek that. And it's very likely for many that what they're feeling as lay people is a call to membership in a lay community. So let me share my story, and maybe you can see some similarities in your own life, and I hope that this will help you sort through this kind of thing. My wife and I, we've been together since we were 17 years old, and we've done everything together. So it's no surprise that we became lay Dominicans together. I was born Catholic. I was baptized Catholic and was sent to CCD classes as a kid, received First Communion, and then my family stopped going to church. So when I was 12 years old, there was no more religion in my life. Even though my experience as a Catholic was pleasant to me, I never had any problem with going to church and things like that. My family just didn't practice any religion. So I was a public school kid from 12 to 17 when I met my future wife in my senior year of high school. As we were talking, no one really knew about this, but I was going through a lot of deep questioning about life, having some thoughts about the purpose of life. I was not necessarily depressed, but I was not very hopeful about life. I had suffered a number of injuries that took out all of my interest in sports, which had been most of my social life, was the source of all of my friends and activities. And I was really left at a point where I was questioning the purpose of life. And it was just at that moment that I met Dania. And as we started to talk and I spent time with her and visited with her family, they eventually invited me to go to church. And so I began attending an evangelical church. And from the minute I started going to the evangelical church, people always used to tell me that they thought that I was called to some kind of ministry, that I had some kind of gift to be a preacher or a pastor or a missionary or something. And so I became a Christian as far as I understood things at the time. And I was attending an evangelical church. However, I was a pre-med student once I started college. I was a very good student. As I matured a bit after 18, 19 years of age, started to take studies very seriously, and not just my formal studies, not just my pre-medical studies and things like that, but I started to study religion quite intensely, studying the scriptures, reading writings of names that I had come across in my reading, mostly Protestant authors. But I began to make an ascent intellectually as a Christian and eventually into classical studies, again, all as a Protestant. But I began to study writers like John Calvin and Jonathan Edwards, John Wesley, older Puritan writers like Richard Baxter, Thomas Watson, men who most Catholics are unfamiliar with. But if you're a Protestant convert, you may know some of these names. But I became an intellectual Christian, and I was very eager to preach the gospel. I was very eager to evangelize. I was very eager to share the faith because the faith that was developing in me was really so significant in my life. I saw it as the answer to all of my questions, all of my problems. I felt it to be so satisfying and joyful that I was eager to preach the gospel and share the faith with non-Christians. In college, in our local church, we formed and started a group that would get together to simply read the Gospels and seek to answer the question, what is the gospel? What is this message that we're supposed to be preaching to the world? And we would study and we'd seek to answer that question, what is the gospel? And then we would actually go out and knock on doors and just invite people to join us at church and introduce them to Christian teaching, talk about the gospel, ask if they had any questions, just to try to get conversations started. And then hopefully we'd find that they did, in fact, take our invitation and join us at church, and we can develop relationships with them and so on. So I was very, very evangelistic. And as I was doing these things, my wife was always right in the mix with me. Um, we also used to go to Princeton because we studied at Rutgers, so I spent a lot of time on Princeton campus, and we'd go there on Friday nights or Saturday nights and just try to start conversation with people in the square in Princeton. We'd hand out tracts and introduce ourselves, talk about things, ask people some questions, just trying to develop and build some religious conversation that would hopefully lead to some good questions and some follow-up. And we used to do the same thing at the Jersey Shore. So while we were in college, we were very evangelistic, very diligent in studying the Christian faith, very eager to preach the gospel. And we were making an ascent, as it were, through the Christian denominations because we were developing intellectually, learning more and more about church history, reading the scriptures more and more. And so we moved from popular evangelicalism, I like to call it rock and roll Christianity, into more of a reformed, traditional Protestant church life, Reformed Baptist, and then eventually into what I would call classical Anglicanism. Um, we were Reformed Baptist, and then when our first children were born, we had to face the whole question of infant baptism. And as I began to read and investigate that, I became very clearly convinced that infant baptism was a part of Christian tradition. And so we became members of the Episcopalian Church, the Reformed Episcopalian Church in the United States in central New Jersey. And I continued to always hear, you should consider the ministry. You seem called to preach and to be a teacher. And so I finally began to take that talk seriously. And the rector at the Episcopalian Church I attended was a professor at an Episcopalian seminary, and he echoed the same thing and invited me to take a trip with him and go visit the Episcopalian seminary. And so I did, and everything was great. And I had agreed to begin study in the Episcopalian seminary at that time. But as I continued to study and discuss things, I started to think, what's really the nature of ordination? Why would I seek ordination in what's really the Church of England, right? The Anglican Church. That started to seem strange to me. Why I, living in central New Jersey and going to a seminary in Pennsylvania, would be ordained by a church that was founded by a king of England. It just seemed very, very odd for some reason at that time. And as I continued to study and think about things, I really started to struggle with this question of ordination. I didn't struggle with the sense that I was called to preach in some way, but I was confused about this question of ordination. Like, who has the right to ordain anyone? And as I continued to study through that and think about it, I became very convinced that there was only one person who really seems to have any claim, any reasonable claim to have the authority to ordain men into the ministry on earth, and that would be the Pope. That would be the Roman Catholic Church. If there was such a thing as ordination, if there is such a thing where men bring other men into the Christian ministry, there would need to be an unbroken succession because that's what it is. Ordination is a sign of a succession. So there would need to be an unbroken succession that extended all the way back to Christ himself. And if there was no such succession, well, then ordination doesn't even make any sense. It's just men ordaining one another. So that became the sort of eye-opening moment where I realized that I was going to be converting to Catholicism. Became very clear. And then as I thought about the studies that I did and the authors that I enjoyed, I started to realize it was St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas. My favorite hymn was by St. Bernard of Clairvaux. Even though I was immersed in Protestant culture, I had lots of Catholic connections, lots of Catholic, um, I don't know, interests. I just hadn't become aware of it until that moment. So I decided to take my wife with me and go visit a Catholic church, and we attended our first Catholic Mass in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, St. Mary's Church, and we just sat in the back row, the back pew, and watched. We had really no idea what was going on. As I said, I was a kid when I went to Catholic church. I never had any clue what was going on. But we sat there and went through the whole Mass and said, what in the world is there to disagree with? What is there possibly to object to? Everything is beautiful. The people were gracious and friendly to us. I just felt very comfortable as an Episcopalian at that point, being present at a Catholic Mass. Now, our situation was strange because our zeal for study and preaching led us into a lot of things that even most Protestants don't know anything about. First of all, as Anglicans, we were introduced to the Book of Common Prayer and to liturgical worship. So we were comfortable with liturgical religion, as it were. We prayed together, morning and evening prayer in the Book of Common Prayer. We're used to reciting the Psalms and things like that. We're already introduced to the gospel canticles, many of the parts of the divine office in the Catholic Church. I had even learned about something called the Anglican Breviary, which is basically a divine office in the Anglican tradition, and I had begun reciting that um, while I was still an Anglican. So we were a weird couple that was already interested in lots of Catholic-ish stuff while we were still Protestants. Around that time also, my daughter, Elizabeth, she was like 3 years old and she had a terrible seizure, like a life-threatening seizure that lasted for hours and hours. And I wasn't home at the time. I was at work teaching, and my wife was home alone with the kids. And Elizabeth had a terrible seizure. And I remember sitting in the hospital going through that, thinking to myself, I just feel like we're not protected. I just feel I had this strange feeling that I felt like we were vulnerable to spiritual attacks for some reason. And again, I felt that making the sign of the cross was comforting. Just a strange experience at the time. And so we were going through that. And then in 2004, while all of this is still developing, we're not Catholics yet or anything, I started sort of arguing with my wife a little bit about why Protestants despise Mary so much. Why don't Protestants embrace and admire the Virgin Mary? Why are we so strange in how we're averse uh, to our Lord's mother? And as sort of an act of rebellion against my own Protestant culture, in 2004, we decided to name our daughter that was born Mary. So we named our daughter Mary. So we had two daughters, Elizabeth and Mary, the two gospel women, the mother of John the Baptist and the mother of our Lord. And I remember naming my daughter Mary and thinking it's just so strange that as a Protestant, we're like trained that we need to despise the most important woman in all of sacred scripture. So I was having all sorts of Catholic thoughts and going through these experiences and studies, and everything was leading me to the Catholic faith. And yet, at the same time, I had this zeal for his evangelization, this love of study, love of teaching, desire to preach. And so the thought of converting to Catholicism was confusing because I thought to myself, well, if I become a Catholic, I'm already married. So there's no way for me to become a priest or anything like that. So what would I do? I wouldn't be able to go into Christian ministry. And yet it was so clear that the Catholic Church was true. I was so convinced of that. There was no question that I was going to convert. It was just a question of what happens to my life if I convert to Catholicism, because I felt like I knew where my life was heading for so long. And in converting to Catholicism, it just threw a big monkey wrench into all of that. So I didn't know at the time. But for all of the reasons I explained, we decided to convert to Catholicism. Uh, and I won't get into any more of my conversion story, but that's what happened at the time. So I was working in Christian education. We decided to convert. We signed up for RCIA and went through that a little bit. And to tell you the truth, the zeal that we brought into the Catholic faith was really quenched by the church. So we came in excited, enthusiastic, eager to study, excited about prayer, excited about learning to be Catholic, excited about growing and sort of gaining all that the Catholic Church had to offer, all that we knew the Catholic Church had to offer. We were excited. And when we had our first meetings with the priest here and discussed these things, I felt like a big bucket of water was just thrown on all of that fire. And it was very discouraging. And I don't know, I use the word quenching. I think that's the best way to put it. But we knew we were going to become Catholic. We didn't we didn't find the reception that we expected, and so we entered into a difficult period. On top of that, as we're making this choice to convert and making all kinds of sacrifices, it cost me a teaching job, forced us to move. We lost all of our friends that we had made as Protestants, and we were moving from really a beautiful Episcopalian church culture that was well educated, beautiful music, beautiful art, beautiful facilities, and so on. We're moving from that into really a messy, disorganized, ugly Catholic church. We were willing to sacrifice all those things for the sake of the true Catholic faith. Um, but then, as we were doing that, we would hear all of this Catholic ecumenical talk where we've got priests welcoming Protestant pastors to come and preach at the church during Lent, and they're going and they're talking at Protestant churches, and we're all talking about how we're all just brothers and sisters in Christ. And that was very confusing to us because we were wondering if this is true, like, do we even need to convert? Like, why are we converting if we're all just brothers and sisters and we all worship the same God? Maybe we should just stay where we were and continue down that path. So our entrance into the Catholic Church was very confusing, very, very unpleasant, confusing, disappointing to say the least. But there were reasons that were moving us to Catholicism that really had nothing to do with that. They were much deeper and more significant than any of that. So we converted 2006. I think we officially converted. Um, I was confirmed. I actually wasn't confirmed at the time. My wife was confirmed. We were married sacramentally, and we began our Catholic life. I can't even explain why I wasn't converted at the time. Again, our move into the Catholic Church was just a big sloppy mess of confusion, um, which was, a sign of I don't know of I guess the state of the church. Um, but anyway, we became Catholics. So here I am. It's 2006. I'm teaching in a private school in Charlotte, still very evangelistic, still very eager to study, very engaged in studies, teaching, studying the classical liberal arts, the humanities, philosophy, getting more and more into Catholic theology, getting into scholastic philosophy pretty intensely at that point. Um, and I just don't know what we're supposed to do in the Catholic Church. I thought about quitting my job because I was teaching in a private school that was not Catholic. I was thinking of quitting my job and going to work at a Catholic school, but as I looked at the Catholic schools, um, it was very clear that I wouldn't be comfortable teaching what I teach in a Catholic school. They don't even offer the type of courses that I would be teaching. So I knew that wasn't an option. So I continued to teach where I was. And in God's providence, very strangely, right around that time, it might have even been 2006, the Missionaries of the Poor established their first American monastery in North Carolina, right where we had lived in Monroe, North Carolina, just a few blocks away from us. So we ended up getting connected with the Missionaries of the Poor and spent a year or so just helping them out, helping them get settled in the town where we lived, getting to know them. I actually learned to pray the Catholic Liturgy of the Hours by joining the MOP brothers for their daily prayers. And then I eventually was invited to go visit them in Jamaica, spend a week or two in their mother house in Jamaica. And I just sort of was able to be immersed in a Catholic monastery life. Where, as I said, I learned to pray the Liturgy of the Hours. I learned a lot about the details of the Catholic faith, Catholic works of mercy, and so on, and came back to the United States. And it was right around that time that the CLAA was developing. I decided to leave my teaching job with a desire to really devote myself to Catholic education, but I didn't want to work in a Catholic school. So I wrote to the bishop, presented my situation, shared some ideas for what I thought I might be able to do, asked for permission to do that, met with the vicar of education, was encouraged to go ahead with my plans, and that led to the formation of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy in 2007, 2008. At that time, my wife was home with our children because she was planning to homeschool. And she was reading these books that she had purchased, these saint biography books that she really enjoyed and the kids were enjoying. And she looked and saw that the author, a woman named Mary Fabian Windiet, had these initials after her name that my wife wasn't familiar with. And so she looked them up, and the initials were TOP. My wife looked them up to try to figure out what they stood for, what they meant, and she learned that they were the initials of a member of the third order of the Dominicans, the third order of the tertiary order of preachers, whatever the letters stand for. I don't remember. But anyway, my wife learned through these saint biography books that she had for the kids about lay Dominicans. And so my wife on her own, she started to look this up and search this out online and she found a website describing the lay Dominicans. And as she was reading that, she was realizing that, man, all of the things that we're interested in, study, apostolic works, prayer, all the things that we're very zealous for, and we really don't feel supported in them just in the ordinary parish experience, but we feel called to what seem like extraordinary activities. They're all described really clearly in this third order community. So this was like 2007, 2008. My wife got in touch, or she found out about the lay Dominicans, and then I came home one night, and she's all excited. She shows me this stuff, and I'm reading through it, saying to myself, that sounds exactly like what I'm interested in. When I became a Catholic, that's what I thought I was signing up for. That's what I thought it was going to be like to be a Catholic. And as I said, I was disappointed when I became a Catholic because I felt like it was nothing like what I had anticipated. But as I was reading about the lay Dominican uh, community, I started to realize like that's what I thought Catholicism was going to be. That's what I was excited about getting into. I thought that that's what there would be, but I was wrong. So we started to read up on the lay Dominicans because what they described seemed to agree so much with our interests and our background and um, just the desires that we had as Christians, both my wife and I. And finally, we got in touch. We reached out to try to make some contact, and we got in touch and found out that the lay Dominican community in North Carolina met way out in the mountains in Western North Carolina, which is like 4 hours away. And so, even though that was all exciting, we had some great discussions and things like that. We knew that there was no way we could commit to a group that was 4 hours away. So, for all that excitement, for all of that, what we thought might be an answer to all of our prayers and desires, it just seemed like the distance just sort of canceled that out. And yet we were introduced to this notion of third order religious communities, and that led us to seek out other options. So we looked into secular Franciscans, looked into Benedictine oblates, and so on. Started to gather information, even went to some meetings. We attended some meetings with the secular Franciscans um, because of our interest in farming and gardening and my love of natural philosophy. I said, "Huh, I never thought maybe there is something of a Franciscan um, vocation I could pursue. I love Saint Bonaventure. I also had heard that Thomas More might have been a secular Franciscan. So we looked at that, went to a few meetings, and just felt, even though we enjoyed the fellowship with the secular Franciscans and liked the thoughts and felt comfortable, it just wasn't an answer to our interests. And because we knew about the lay Dominicans, we knew how well aligned we seemed to be with the lay Dominicans because of our interest in prayer and study and scholastic philosophy, classical education, and so on, and especially evangelization and preaching. Um, we knew we aligned so well with what we had read and heard about the lay Dominicans that it was clear the secular Franciscans might have been a good plan B, but they just really didn't align with our own characteristics and desires. So we knew that wasn't it. So finally, a decade later, so I'm just consumed with my work in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy between 2008 and 2019 or so. And finally, in God's providence, I decided to check in on the lay Dominicans late 2019, maybe even into 2020. And it turns out that they have a new chapter established in Charlotte, which is just 40 minutes from where we live. So my wife and I were excited about that. We got in touch and were invited to start attending the Inquirer meetings, and we did. We told them the story that we had already been interested in this, 12 years ago, but the distance made it impossible. Um, we already had some contacts that they knew of, so we had some common connections and things like that. And so it was during the COVID time, so everything was upside down, and we just started to join the Charlotte area Dominican uh, group meetings by means of Zoom video. So we attended the first few meetings by Zoom, just got to introduce ourselves, got to meet some of the other people, hear their stories, see what's going on, got to walk through their Inquirer meetings and get a taste for the formation program in the lay Dominican community, and it was just awesome. It was very, very helpful, very rich. I didn't feel like I was the smartest person in the room. There's always a saying that I tell people that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And it was one of the first times as a Christian where I felt like I was no longer the smartest person in the room, and I knew that it was good for me to be there. There was so much to learn. There's so much practical experience. And I just knew that we had found our place, even though we couldn't attend yet in person. Like I said, we started to attend the Zoom meetings. We started halfway through the year, through the formation year. So even though we were attending meetings, the group leaders told us that this couldn't be considered our first year. So the following fall, we really committed for our first year as inquirers, and we started going to the meetings. And again, as inquirers, it's really just an opportunity for anyone interested in the lay Dominican life to just attend and learn, to ask questions, to participate in the readings, to go through the formation stuff. It's a very helpful time to try and figure out what's going on in your own soul and whether God is actually leading you to a Dominican vocation. So it's very, very helpful. Very nothing required. There's no commitment or anything like that. It's just really meant to help a person discern whether they might be called to a Dominican life. So we went through that first year of inquirer formation and loved every second of it. Just to give you an idea of what we did, we really committed to take it easy and ease our way in. So the way the meetings worked was we had a monthly, the meetings are once a month. So we had a monthly assigned formation reading. And we'd prepare that reading over the course of the month, and then we'd get together for the Dominican Inquirers meeting, and we would discuss what we had studied. And it just covered the basics of Dominican life, the history of the order, the life of Saint Dominic, the specific characteristics of Dominican soul and life, the four pillars of the Dominican life, and so on. Just a good introduction to Dominican spirituality. And so we would go and attend those meetings, discuss the readings with the other Dominicans, and then we would leave. We didn't participate in the rest. We didn't make too much of it. We really didn't know if we were going to be able to commit because of our work in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy being so busy. But we just went through the formation readings, participated in the classes, got to know the people and so on, and worked through that first year as inquirers. And then after that year, decided that we wanted to move forward. So well, actually, I talked about it with my priest, and I want to make sure I share this because I went to confession as I was thinking about this. I went to confession and I presented the idea to my priest. I said, I've been attending inquiry meetings with the lay Dominicans, and I'm thinking about becoming a lay Dominican or pursuing life as a lay Dominican. And I just asked him plainly, what do you think? What would you advise? Do you think that's a good idea? What do you think? And um, to my surprise, he responded positively and encouraged me to do it. And he told me, there's just one thing I want you to know. I want you to know that if you become a lay Dominican, that the promises that you take, um, which are to to attend the meetings and to pray according to the rule of the lay community and so on. He said those promises, you're not bound to those promises so that any aversion from them would be considered sinful. They're not like religious vows. They're simply promises. They're intentions that you commit to, resolutions, but it's understood within the life of a layperson that there's just lots of distractions and reasons why you can't keep to it. And I don't want you to be burdened in your conscience thinking that these good desires and promises that you take freely cause you to become guilty of sins when you don't live up to those promises. So he wanted me to understand very clearly the difference between the promises made in a lay community and the vows taken by priests or religious. And so that was helpful. So I had his approval and decided to go forward with the formal application to begin formation as a candidate. And I believe it was at that point that I needed a reference letter from him. I also received a reference letter from the deacon who serves at our parish, and then I needed a third reference letter, and I chose to ask my mother. I said, what would be better for a man than to have a recommendation for his spiritual life that comes from his mother? I mean, I think of the fourth commandment and say, I think parents should have a say in these things. So I asked my mother, who was a Catholic, who had become a revert to the Catholic faith through my conversion and became a faith formation teacher. I asked her if she would write a reference letter for me. And so I got my references together, put my application together, and entered into candidacy. So I went through my first year of candidacy. We engaged more fully in the lay community instead of just going for the monthly formation study and then leaving. We stayed for the whole meeting. So we went and we had our formation meeting and discussion. Then we prayed morning prayer together. We had mass together. And then we had a lecture from the spiritual director of the chapter. And all of it was just wonderful. It just got better and better over time. The relationships we developed um, were just great relationships, the kind of relationships that we had always hoped we would find in the Catholic Church, but really didn't see possible in our parish. So we really became aware that this lay community was the fulfillment of the desire that we had had, of the expectations that we had when we joined the Catholic Church. And so we saw that the parish is really more of the general Catholic community, but if we're called to something more specific, more peculiar within the Catholic, within the breadth of the Catholic faith and life of the church, there are provisions for it through the different religious communities that exist, and our interests aligned with those of the Dominican community. So we went through that formation for the whole year, completed everything, loved every minute of it, learned so much. I learned so much during that year of candidacy formation. I really learned how to pray the rosary with understanding, really understanding the purpose of the rosary. I learned to understand the contemplative life during that year of candidacy formation. So many important lessons that I learned. I really learned the essence of the Catholic faith during that year of candidacy formation. And then at the end of that year, we went through an interview, and by God's grace, we were invited to join. And both of us um, moved from candidacy into making uh, our first promises. And so, as a result of those promises, I received my Dominican cross I received initially, and then when I made my temporary profession, the white Dominican scapular, which you can see. Um, so I became a lay Dominican and now live as a lay Dominican. So that's a long story of how I came to discern a calling to life as a lay Dominican. Um, Now the challenge is actually living up to this calling of life as a lay Dominican. It's very challenging. I appreciate the challenge. I'm humbled by the challenge because it's very difficult. It may sound simple to pray the rosary every day, to pray morning and evening prayer, to attend mass as frequently as possible, to attend monthly formation meetings, and so on, the different requirements of the Dominican life. But that challenge is good for me. It strengthens in me the virtue of religion. The promises motivate me to keep those commitments and do them in ways that I might not be motivated to do if I was just winging it on my own. I enjoy the community of my Dominican brothers and sisters. I especially enjoy being able to experience all of this with my wife and basically be two Dominicans living together, which is pretty cool. Um, and now I'm in the second year of our temporary profession. It's a 3-year temporary profession. And in another year, I'll have another time of discernment to consider whether this is really what I should commit myself to, and whether this is really what what I desire to commit myself to, and make perpetual promises, which is for me, I tend to consider myself honest, if anything. I take promises like this very seriously, and I'm not, I'm not zealous to the sense that I would make these promises, unconditionally. I know that there are limitations in my life. My life is very busy. The Classical Liberal Arts Academy just continues to grow and grow. My life gets more and more challenging. I'm also getting older. So I'm discerning through this temporary profession, these 3 years, not whether I want to pursue perpetual promises, but whether I, can honestly make promises to live according to the rule of the lay Dominicans for the rest of my life. It's a very serious um, commitment to make. It's a very challenging commitment, and I want to make sure that I'm able to do that. So that's what led us into lay Dominican life. You can just see in my story, I think, how all of these different developments and influences kind of are woven together to lead me to this place. And then also providential events lead us to this place. It's not me being, the classicist and the teacher dragging my wife into these things. My wife had to go through her own discernment process. She did all the formation readings. She went through the interviews. She made the decision to become a lay Dominican herself. She had to work all of that out on her own. But as I've said, we've always been eager to study. We've always been evangelistic. We both work in education. We're both zealous for church teaching. We both feel called to defend the Catholic faith. Um, we're both very strongly persuaded of the teachings of the Catholic Church. We're both committed to reverence and obedience to the Holy Father, which is another key element of the Dominican life that attracted me. Being a classicist, I'm often, befriended by the so-called trad Catholics who assume that my interest in classical studies would align me with their like criticism of the modern church and bishops and all of this stuff. And I totally do not support that. As I said, my conversion to Catholicism was largely caused by my conviction of the necessity and truth of the papacy. And so as a Catholic, I've always felt very strongly drawn to obedience and respect for the Pope. And again, that's another one of the key characteristics of Dominican life is that the Dominicans for over 800 years have always been in close communion and are loyal to the Pope uh, through all of their centuries of existence. And for me, that was an attractive thing that led me to want to become a Dominican was my conviction of the papacy, my disinterest in the so-called trad Catholic movements, which I just felt were copies of what I had left behind in Protestantism. And again, that was also part of the discernment of this Dominican life. Now, when you consider the Dominican life, the four pillars, right? It begins with prayer, study, apostolate, and community. Those are the four pillars. The community obviously comes through the life of the chapter. Prayer is by, obviously devotion to the rosary and commitment to the liturgical prayer of the church in the Liturgy of the Hours. Study consists of real study, not just study of Catholic teaching, not just catechesis, but study of philosophy and modern arts and sciences. It's a commitment to profound, to broad and deep studies. Um, so you can obviously see my interest there. But then when it comes to apostolate, the question is, how do you contemplate and share the fruits of that contemplation? So one of the pillars of the Dominican life is apostolate. And with the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, if there was any of the four pillars that I was obviously already engaged with and committed to, it's my work in education. So I found a real purpose, a real focus and purpose to direct everything that I do in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, to really allow it to be informed and directed by my Dominican formation, Dominican spiritual life. And so I've just found my work in education to become uh, more focused and clear. I think anyone who's been involved in the academy through the years would agree that since my entrance into the lay Dominican family, my work in education has become very focused, very efficient. I think it's become much more productive. I think that I've become much wiser in my work in education because of the resources that are available to me as a Dominican. I feel like I've been um, uh, I don't know, more filled with grace to do things stronger spiritually, stronger physically, stronger intellectually. So I feel like that's all contributed to the success of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy through recent years, and continues to really to really be a source of information and direction in everything that I do in education. So when you put those four pillars together, prayer, study, apostolate, and community, you can just see how in my life and in my wife's life, who works in all of these things with me, you can just see how everything aligned so clearly. Now, I would say that many of the people I talk to, homeschooling parents, Catholics who work in education, and so on, many of them who have an interest in me, have some connection with me. They're interested in the things that I talk about. They're interested in the work that I do. They're interested in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy and so on. I really urge them to consider whether it's not really me that you're drawn to and attracted by, but it's really Dominican spirituality. I think that there are many Catholic men and women who I meet in Catholic education who are homeschooling parents or Catholic school teachers or Catholic school administrators. They're very interested in Catholic prayer. They're very interested in Catholic study. They love the saints. They love St. Albert the Great and St. Thomas, and they love talking about Catholic philosophy and all this kind of stuff. They love arguing about the faith, and they like to evangelize their non-Catholic men and women. And they're always complaining that they don't have community. They're always complaining about their parishes. They're always complaining that they don't feel like they have any friends. One of the first questions homeschooling families ask me is, what can we do about community? And, my answer to that question, if you're interested in the things that I'm interested in, and you can see that we're like-minded in these things, and we have a lot of common interests, my advice is I really think you should consider whether you are being called to life as a lay Dominican. I don't know I don't know what the obstacles would be. Um, these interests to live in the 21st century and be interested in the Catholic faith and scholastic philosophy and classical education, Catholic culture, like, it's not normal to have these interests in the 21st century. Obviously, you're being drawn by God to these interests. But my question is, are you called to life as a lay Dominican? Is that really where you should look for answers to questions you have? I know there's attraction to this like trad Catholic stuff and oh, it must be the Latin Mass, but I would advise you to ignore that, which really is a call nowhere. You're not really going into any sort of actual approved spiritual community with those things. You're just sort of being a maverick running around seeking what seems good to you rather than coming under the order and direction of an approved religious community with a rule of life and so on. Um, would the lay Dominicans not be a better place for you to be? And if again, if you appreciate the things I do, the things that I talk about, all that I've just explained, I recommend that you um, get in touch with a local lay Dominican group. They're very easy to find. If you need help, just get in touch with me. I'll give you contact information. But get in touch, tell them you're interested, and just start participating in the Inquirer meetings. That's what they're for. Um, it's just for you to come and read and talk and meet people and learn so you can make an intelligent decision. I'd recommend you just get involved in the Inquirers classes that meet. Go and attend. Don't be a weirdo. Don't sit at home like some kind of recluse. Go and join the community as an inquirer. Learn about the Dominican order, learn about what it means to be a lay Dominican, and allow yourself, with that information and experience, to make an intelligent, grown-up decision as regards your own spiritual life. That's what we did, and like I said, it was nothing but enjoyable, very, very helpful. And I'm not just talking about it was cool to meet other people. I went there as a student. I went there to learn, and I was just overwhelmed with how much instruction there is in the lay Dominican community in the formation program, how many resources there are in terms of spiritual direction and advice on how to pray, how to prepare for confession. We had a great lecture one week on examination of conscience that like changed my wife and my life in terms of preparing for confession and learning how to do that. When I go to confession, I bring this sheet with me, and when I unfold it, my priest always laughs. Like here comes the Dominican with his examination of conscience prepared in like size 6 font. It's just this document we were given, but there's just so much advice and spiritual direction and help and community and learning resources in general that if you feel frustrated or empty, you just feel like you're not growing as a Catholic, and you're always looking to the parish, or you're thinking, well, I just need to change parish, or I need to go to a different parish, or I need to go to that parish, you may be missing the big picture, which is that parish life is not the end of what the Catholic Church offers us. Parish life is really just the beginning of what the Catholic Church offers us. And rather than acting like a Protestant and bouncing all over the place, church shopping, you should consider whether the problem isn't the parish at all, but whether it's the fact that you're just not pursuing opportunities within the Catholic Church that are available to you. And that's what I would encourage you to consider. So anyway, that's the story of how I learned about the lay Dominicans, how I discerned whether I would become a lay Dominican, how I learned about other lay religious communities, and how I examined them, and often by experience would learn what interests me in them, what doesn't seem to align with my interests. And over time, it just became clearer and clearer and was confirmed by reference letters from my own pastor, from interviews with the lay Dominican community, welcoming us into the group. It's a whole process, and this is normal Catholicism. This is normal Catholicism. This is how the Catholic Church works. The Dominican order was founded 800 years ago, as was the Franciscan order. This is how Catholic life has worked for many Catholics for hundreds and hundreds of years. So I'd recommend you look into it, look at the different religious orders, learn about their lay communities. Most of the major orders have lay communities. Learn about them, visit, go and ask questions. Don't be a dodo. Go and ask questions. Go and seek advice. Do the formation readings. Pray about it. Think about it. And it'll help you to discern through these things. And I think that as Catholics, many of us are called to something more than mere parish participation. And so I'd encourage you to check it out. And like I said, if you don't know where to begin, I recommend you just get in touch, whether it's in the comments. If this is on YouTube, you can just ask a question in the comments, and I'll hook you up with contact information or show you websites you can use to get information. But don't be a dodo. Don't sit there and complain about the parish or pretend like The parish priest is supposed to provide everything you need for your Catholic life when you've got unique interests and unique gifts and abilities. There are places to seek these things, there are places to exercise these things, and it's not necessarily in your parish. So, anyway, I hope that's helpful. I wanted to reply to the request for that information. My wife's story, I think it parallels mine for the most part. Probably be interesting to get her story as well, but that's how we became lay Dominicans. And there's probably nothing that we've ever done in our life that's been more satisfying, a cause of more joy than becoming lay Dominicans. Directs everything I do every day, fills my life with culture and inspiration as a lay Dominican to look at these saints like Thomas Aquinas and Albert the Great, um, Saint Catherine of Siena, Martin de Porres, just to go on and on through the list of saints and consider that they're my brothers and sisters, my fellow Dominicans. That's just such a source of encouragement and joy in the Catholic life, and to look back at Saint Dominic as the founder of the community. In our formation, we learn that he is always involved in our vocation, even before we become Dominicans. To see the devotion to the Rosary and to the Blessed Virgin Mary, to have all of this direction in our Marian devotion, so it's not just, you know, um, superstitious kind of wacky popular religion, but actually informed devotion. One of the greatest teachers on the Rosary was Saint Louis de Montfort, who was a Dominican, right? There's just so much to gain, so many riches, and all of that becomes yours as a lay Dominican. It's very, very, very fulfilling and inspiring every day. My wife, I know, would say the same. That's not to say that the other communities in the church are inferior, or that's not true of them. It is if your spiritual gifts and your vocation aligns better with their unique charisms and their unique principles, you'll find that same satisfaction in those communities. So I encourage you to seek that out rather than get into this church shopping parish criticism that's popular today among people who I think don't know what they should be doing. So, anyway, I hope that's helpful. God bless.